Are you out of your mind? Do you even understand? You're agreeing to become a rented womb. The words echoed in my mind, sharp and relentless, as if they were lodged there forever. My name is Sarah Matthews, and I'm only 19 years old. I never thought I'd find myself in this position, faced with a choice so extreme, so unthinkable, it would change the course of my life forever. But for my brother, Ben, I had to do something. Anything. We were all we had left in this world, and I wasn't about to lose him. 3 days earlier, I came home that night completely worn out. My shift at the diner had been long, filled with the usual noise of clattering dishes, hurried orders, and restless customers. My feet ached, my hands were sore, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. But as I pushed open the door, I felt the world shift in a way I couldn't explain. There was a heaviness in the room, an unsettling silence that settled deep in my gut. I called out, "Ben, are you home?" No answer. The house was still, too still, and as I took a step forward, my heart began to race. And then I saw him, my little brother, Ben, crumpled on the floor of the living room, unmoving. "Ben!" I dropped everything, running to his side. He was barely breathing, his face pale, his hands cold. Panic gripped me as I tried to shake him awake, my voice trembling as I whispered, "Please, Ben, wake up! Just wake up!" I don't remember how I managed to get him to the hospital. Everything was a blur of flashing lights, rushing doctors, and the relentless beeping of machines. I sat in the waiting room, feeling numb, every second stretching out painfully, the unknown gnawing at me. Finally, a doctor came out, his expression grim. "Ms. Matthews?" I leapt to my feet. "How is he? Is he going to be okay?" The doctor hesitated before speaking, his tone measured but serious. "Your brother has a brain tumor, and it's critical. The surgery he needs must happen within the next 24 hours, but the procedure is complex, and it will cost around $50,000. The world seemed to tilt, and for a moment I couldn't process his words. $50,000. I barely had 50 cents in my pocket. My chest felt tight and I struggled to breathe. I don't have that kind of money," I stammered, my voice breaking. "Isn't there some other way? Please, doctor, you have to save him. He's all I have." The doctor's expression softened, but he shook his head. "I'm sorry, Ms. Matthews. Without the funds, the hospital can't proceed." As he walked away, the weight of it all crashed down on me. I sank into a chair, feeling completely defeated. I was alone, powerless, and desperate, my thoughts spiraling as I realized how close I was to losing Ben. The next few hours passed in a haze. I dialed every number I could think of, friends, neighbors, anyone who might help. I begged, pleaded, but every call ended the same way. Some apologized, others made excuses, but no one could give me what I needed. By midnight, I was sitting in the hospital corridor, my head in my hands, feeling as though my world was crumbling. My heart ached for Ben, my little brother, who had always been there for me, who'd smiled through the hardest times, who'd kept me grounded when everything seemed to fall apart, and now I couldn't even save him. A quiet tear slipped down my cheek. I whispered into the empty corridor, "Please, please, someone, anyone, help us." Just as I was about to lose hope, a figure appeared at the end of the hallway, moving with a quiet, almost eerie calm. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, his gaze steady and intense, and he stopped just a few steps away from me. "Miss Matthews?" he asked, his voice smooth and polite. but with an underlying sharpness that made my skin prickle. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Mr. Blake," he said, his eyes fixed on me with a calculated precision. "I understand you're in need of urgent funds to save your brother's life." His words sent a chill down my spine. How did he know? I hadn't told anyone except the people I'd called for help. Something about him felt off, too controlled, too detached. But I was too desperate to question it. "Yes, that's right," I answered, feeling a flicker of hope, though a part of me knew there was a catch. He nodded as if considering something, then spoke, his words slow and deliberate. "I represent a benefactor, someone who can cover the cost of your brother's surgery and more." I froze, barely daring to breathe. "What do you mean?" "My employer is willing to pay you $100,000. It will cover the surgery and any additional care he may need. In return, you will provide him with something valuable." He paused, watching me closely. "You will carry a child for him, a surrogate pregnancy." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. What are you saying?" He held up a hand, calm and controlled. "Before you react, understand that this is a straightforward business proposition. My employer values discretion and efficiency. You agree to his terms, sign a contract, and the money will be yours." A whirlwind of emotions hit me all at once: disbelief, confusion, fear. I looked at him, searching his face for some hint of humanity, but his expression remained blank, almost mechanical. "But why me?" I managed, my voice barely holding steady. Mr. Blake shrugged as though it was the most trivial question in the world. "Because my employer chose you. He believes you are suitable. Beyond that, it's not for you to question his motives." My mind was racing. This was insane, absolutely insane. But then my thoughts circled back to Ben lying in that hospital room, and the reality of my situation crashed over me. $50,000, $100,000, amounts that were as impossible for me as reaching the stars. And yet, here was this stranger offering me everything I needed to save my brother. But at what cost? The weight of the decision settled on me, heavy and cold. My life would change forever if I accepted this deal. I would have to give my body, my life over to a stranger's demands. It felt like a trap, like a decision that could consume me, but I had no other options. There was no one else coming to help. Mr. Blake pulled out a folder and handed it to me. "The contract," he said smoothly, "contains all the terms. Once you sign, the funds will be transferred and your brother's treatment will begin immediately." My hands trembled as I took the folder, feeling the weight of the paper as if it was an anchor pulling me under. The thought of signing, of agreeing to such a thing, made my stomach churn. But Ben's face flashed in my mind, his smile, his laugh, and the endless memories we shared. I looked at Mr. Blake, my heart pounding. "And if I don't sign?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then your brother's life will simply be out of our hands." I swallowed hard, feeling tears sting my eyes. I knew I had no choice. I took a deep breath, lifted the pen, and signed the contract sealing my fate. And so, with a simple signature, my life took a turn I could never have imagined. If you want to know what happened next and the dark path this decision led me down, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and stay with me. I had signed the papers, binding myself to a world I knew nothing about. The ink was barely dry when Mr. Blake gestured for me to follow him. With each step, a cold fear spread through me, but the thought of Ben's surgery kept me moving. I reminded myself this was all for him. Mr. Blake led me out to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The driver didn't acknowledge us, eyes fixed straight ahead as we climbed in. As the car pulled away, I finally broke the silence. "Where are we going?" "To meet Mr. Cross, my employer," Mr. Blake replied, his tone clipped. "He'll explain everything once we arrive." I wanted to press him for more details, but something in his demeanor told me it was better to stay silent. My heart pounded as the car sped down unfamiliar roads, eventually turning onto a narrow, winding path flanked by towering trees. I watched as the city faded into the distance, replaced by vast fields and dense forest, isolating us from everything I knew. We finally pulled up to a sprawling estate, the type I'd only seen in movies. The mansion loomed before us, its stone walls and iron gates casting a foreboding shadow. Mr. Blake opened my door, and as I stepped out, I was overwhelmed by the sheer size of the place. I hadn't expected luxury, and yet this mansion felt cold, almost like a prison. "Right this way," Mr. Blake instructed, leading me up the stone steps. The large doors opened to reveal a grand hallway lined with dimly lit chandeliers, their golden glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. He directed me into a sitting room where a man sat in a high-back leather chair, his face concealed by a black mask. His presence was imposing, his figure still and silent as he waited for us to enter. "Mr. Cross, this is Miss Matthews," Mr. Blake introduced me. The man inclined his head slightly, his voice deep and controlled. "Sarah, thank you for joining us. I trust Mr. Blake has informed you of what's required." I felt my mouth go dry. He mentioned the terms, yes. "Good," he said, his tone sending a shiver down my spine. "I value efficiency, Sarah, and I expect you to adhere to the contract precisely as outlined." He gestured to a stack of papers on the table beside him. "These additional documents detail your responsibilities as well as certain conditions." Mr. Blake picked up the papers, handing them to me without any hesitation. My hands trembled as I took them, my eyes scanning the words. It was more than just a contract. It was a list of rules, restrictions, and commands. "You will remain here for the duration of your pregnancy, monitored and attended by my personal doctor, who will ensure the health and safety of the child," he continued, his voice carrying an unsettling finality. "You will have no contact with the outside world." My heart skipped a beat. "Wait, what about my brother? I need to see him, make sure he's okay." Mr. Cross's cold stare settled on me. "Your brother's care has been taken care of as per our agreement. But for the next 9 months, your life will belong to me. Once the child is born, your obligations will end, and you will leave without ever attempting to contact us again." The walls seemed to close in on me as I took in his words. I was to be confined to this place, hidden from the world, my every move controlled. Yet the thought of Ben, alive and well because of this sacrifice, kept me anchored. "Do you understand, Miss Matthews?" Mr. Cross asked, his voice calm but unyielding. I nodded, unable to speak. "Then we shall proceed. Mr. Blake, show her to her room." The days began to blur together. My room was large but cold, with a single bed, a small bathroom, and a window with bars. Every morning the doctor came to check on me, her visits brief and clinical. The staff brought me meals, leaving as quickly as they came, and there were no phones, no internet, no way to reach the outside world. At night, I would stare at the ceiling, my thoughts filled with memories of Ben. I pictured him smiling, laughing, his face lit with excitement, and reminded myself that he was safe, that all of this was worth it for him. Weeks turned into months, and my confinement became a twisted routine. The only sound in my room was the echo of my own heartbeat, the only company the ever-growing presence of the child within me. Sometimes I'd press my hand against my stomach, feeling the faint movement, a bittersweet reminder of the life I was nurturing only to hand it over to a stranger. One night, as I lay in the dim light, there was a knock on my door. Before I could respond, Mr. Cross entered, his tall figure looming in the doorway. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "How are you finding your accommodations?" I swallowed, unsure how to answer. "It's fine." He tilted his head slightly. "Remember, this arrangement benefits you as much as it does me. The life you're creating holds value not just to me, but to you and your brother. I trust you understand the importance of your role." His words were cold, devoid of any empathy, as if this entire ordeal was nothing more than a transaction. He studied me for a moment, his gaze piercing. Then, without another word, he turned and left, leaving me alone once more. I sat there, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I was nothing more than a vessel to him, a tool to fulfill his purpose. The realization filled me with a hollow sadness, but I clung to the one hope that kept me going: Ben's survival. Months passed, and finally, the day arrived. I went into labor in that cold, sterile room, surrounded by strangers. The pain was overwhelming, but the thought of finally ending this ordeal pushed me through. When it was over, I heard the faint cry of a baby, my baby. I reached out, wanting to hold him, to feel the life I'd carried for so long. But before I could touch him, the doctor whisked him away, placing him in the arms of Mr. Cross. I tried to protest, but my voice was weak, drowned out by the exhaustion and the cold stares of those around me. "Thank you for your service, Sarah," Mr. Cross said, his tone devoid of any warmth. "Your contract is complete." I felt tears prick my eyes, the ache of separation tearing through me. I had known this was coming, but the finality of it hit harder than I'd anticipated. As I watched him leave with the child, a surge of defiance rose within me. This couldn't be the end. I couldn't just walk away. I needed to know why he had wanted this child so desperately, what purpose it would serve. If you've been captivated by Sarah's story so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The truth behind Mr. Cross's demands is about to be revealed. And trust me, it's darker than you could ever imagine. As the door closed behind Mr. Cross, a hollow silence filled the room. I felt a deep, aching void in my chest, an emptiness I hadn't prepared myself for. I lay back, exhausted but restless, the thought of my son, my child, eating away at me. But something had changed inside me. The pain of letting go was one thing, but the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong was something else entirely. I needed answers. Days passed, but instead of escorting me out as promised, I remained locked in that sterile room as though forgotten. Every time I asked to leave, the staff dodged my questions or avoided me altogether. It became clear I wasn't yet free. They weren't done with me, and the realization filled me with a creeping dread. That night, I waited until the halls fell silent. Gathering what little strength I had, I snuck out of my room, navigating the dimly lit corridors, my heart pounding with each step. I moved through the shadowy hallways until I came across a door I hadn't noticed before. It was ajar, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. Taking a shaky breath, I slipped inside. The air grew colder as I descended, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I reached the bottom, finding myself in a vast, sterile room with medical equipment scattered around as if it were a makeshift hospital. At the far end, I saw a faint light flickering from a monitor, casting shadows across the room. Steeling myself, I approached and noticed several files stacked on the table beside the monitor. Hesitantly, I picked one up. My breath caught as I saw a familiar name printed at the top: Baby Matthews. My hands shook as I skimmed through the file, my heart sinking with every word. It was a detailed report of my pregnancy, but there was something else. Notes that hinted at experimental research, genetic testing, and even mentions of a project title, the Air Initiative. What is this?" I whispered, horrified. Footsteps echoed behind me, and I whirled around to see Mr. Cross standing there, his face concealed by the mask as always. His voice was low, almost amused. "So you decided to go exploring, did you?" I backed away, clutching the file to my chest. "What are you doing with my child? Why did you need him? And what is this initiative?" He stepped forward, his tone calm yet menacing. "It's simple, Sarah. Your child is a tool. The Matthews lineage carries a unique genetic marker, one that my family has searched for generations. Your son carries this marker, and with it, he will serve a greater purpose." My blood ran cold. "You're using him as some kind of experiment?" He shrugged. "In a way. But he will be cared for, protected, molded to serve a legacy greater than anything you could provide." My voice trembled with fury. "You had no right! He's my son!" Mr. Cross's gaze hardened. "You signed him away the moment you agreed to the contract. I suggest you remember that." Rage bubbled within me, stronger than fear. "I did this to save my brother's life, not to create whatever you're planning. I won't let you use him." Mr. Cross tilted his head, his cold eyes watching me with an almost pitying look. "You misunderstand, Sarah. I didn't choose you simply because you were desperate. I chose you because I knew you'd do anything for family. And now, your son will be part of mine." The words sliced through me, but I refused to back down. "You can't keep me here forever. And when I leave, I will make sure everyone knows who you are and what you're doing." A dark smile crossed his face. "You're welcome to try, but I assure you, no one will believe the ramblings of a desperate, frightened girl." But something flickered in his eyes, a small crack in his control, and in that moment, I knew he had underestimated me. He believed he held all the power, but he didn't know the depths of a mother's resolve. Later that night, I devised a plan. I waited for the mansion to fall silent, every nerve on edge, my heart thudding with anticipation. I couldn't leave without my child, not when I knew what awaited him in this twisted place. I retraced my steps back to the basement, searching every corner, my eyes darting in the dim light. And then, at the end of a long corridor, I found a small nursery. My heart leaped as I spotted him, my baby sleeping peacefully in a crib. I rushed over, my hands trembling as I scooped him up, holding him close for the first time. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "I'm so sorry, but we're getting out of here." The faint sound of footsteps alerted me. I turned to see Mr. Cross and his security team blocking the doorway, his expression unreadable. He stepped forward, his voice a deadly whisper. "You really thought you could take him away from me?" I backed against the wall, clutching my son to my chest. "Please, just let us go. I'll do whatever you want, just don't hurt him." He regarded me for a long moment before speaking. You are remarkably brave, Sarah. But I will not allow my legacy to walk out that door." And with that, he motioned to his guards. As the guards approached, my mind raced, desperate to find a way out. I clung to my child, the weight of everything crushing me. But then, an idea struck, a last desperate gamble. "Wait!" I cried out, forcing my voice to remain steady. If you care so much about your legacy, then let me stay with him. I'll raise him here, within your family, under your terms. Just don't take him away from me." Mr. Cross paused, his gaze piercing, as if assessing my sincerity. The silence stretched painfully until he finally spoke. "Very well, Sarah. You may remain. But understand this. You belong to me now." The days turned to months, and I stayed in that mansion, raising my son under Mr. Cross's watchful eye. I became a prisoner in every sense, but my bond with my child grew stronger, a flicker of light in the darkness. But even as I played the part of the obedient mother, I never gave up on finding a way out. Every moment, I gathered information, observed the routines, and waited for the perfect opportunity. I was no longer the same girl who had walked into this nightmare months ago. I was a mother fighting for her child's freedom, and I would not rest until we were both free. Months turned into years, and I adapted to my life in the mansion. I became a mother, tending to my son who grew under Mr. Cross's cold and watchful eye. I tried my best to shield him, to nurture a warmth in him that Mr. Cross seemed determined to snuff out. I named him Ethan, a small rebellion that Mr. Cross reluctantly allowed. Though I played the part of the compliant mother, my mind was always focused on escape. The house was a fortress, with guards patrolling the grounds and security cameras watching every corner. But I learned the routines, watched for patterns, anything I could use to gain an advantage. Then, one cold winter night, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected. A quiet conversation between two maids. One of them, Lily, had only been there a few months, yet she had seen more than most. I overheard her whispering to a fellow maid about Mr. Cross's plans, hinting at a larger network of people he controlled. I confronted her later in the hallway. "Lily," I whispered urgently, "I need your help." Her eyes widened, but she nodded. "Meet me in the pantry at midnight," she murmured. That night, Lily revealed more than I could have imagined. She had a brother who had also suffered at Mr. Cross's hands, trapped in his employ and unable to escape. Together, we began to hatch a plan. It would take months to prepare, but with her access to the mansion and my knowledge of the layout, we believed it was possible. Days blended into weeks as I worked with Lily, carefully assembling the pieces of our escape. I pretended to play along with Mr. Cross's plans for Ethan, who he believed would one day inherit his business empire. Every day, I whispered to Ethan, instilling in him the knowledge that he was loved, that there was a life outside these walls where we could be free. One evening, as I sat with Ethan in the nursery, Mr. Cross entered, his gaze cold and assessing. "You're doing well with him, Sarah," he said. "Ethan's development is satisfactory." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Thank you," I replied carefully, not daring to reveal my true feelings. He studied me, his expression unreadable. "Remember, Sarah, all of this, the security, the restrictions are for Ethan's own good. You, too, have a role to play in his future. Don't lose sight of that." I forced myself to nod, hiding the fire of defiance that burned within me. Little did he know that my loyalty had never been to him. It was to my son and the life we deserved to have outside this prison. Finally, the night arrived. Lily and I had prepared everything. She would disable the security cameras for a brief window, long enough for Ethan and me to slip out undetected. With the guards' usual rotation, we would have a small chance to make it to the wooded area beyond the mansion, where a friend of Lily's was waiting with a car. As the clock struck midnight, I gathered Ethan, wrapping him in a blanket to protect him from the cold. His small hand clung to mine, his innocent eyes looking up at me with trust. I whispered, "We're going on an adventure, Ethan. We're going to find a better place, just you and me." I met Lily in the hallway, her face tense but determined. She gave me a small nod. "Go. I'll hold them off as long as I can." With my heart racing, I slipped down the hallway, Ethan close by my side. Every creak of the floorboards felt like thunder in my ears, but we pressed on, the door to freedom growing closer with each step. But as we reached the exit, a familiar voice cut through the silence. "Sarah, did you really think you could leave?" I turned, horror flooding through me as I saw Mr. Cross standing there, flanked by 2 guards. His expression was a mix of anger and disappointment, his eyes cold and merciless. "After everything I've done for you, after all the protection and care I've provided, you repay me with betrayal." His voice was a deadly whisper, and I could feel the weight of his wrath bearing down on me. I held Ethan closer, my voice trembling. "This isn't protection, it's imprisonment. We deserve a life outside these walls, free from your control." Mr. Cross sneered. "Freedom? You think you know what freedom is? You think the world out there will give you and your son the security I've provided here?" His words burned, but I stood my ground. "Anything is better than this prison." For a moment, he simply stared at me, his face unreadable. Then he motioned to the guards. "Take them back, and as for you, Sarah, perhaps it's time we reconsidered our arrangement." The guards seized me, pulling Ethan from my arms as he cried out, reaching for me. "Mommy!" he screamed, his small voice filled with fear. I struggled, desperate to hold him, but the guard's grip was unyielding. They locked me in a small, barren room, leaving me alone with only my thoughts and the echo of Ethan's cries. Days turned into weeks, and I saw no one except for the occasional guard bringing me food. I didn't know what had become of Ethan or what Mr. Cross planned to do with him. The silence was suffocating, and I felt myself growing weaker with each passing day. But I clung to hope. I knew Lily was still out there, working in the shadows, and I trusted that she hadn't given up on us. Somehow, I would find a way back to Ethan. I would never stop fighting for him. After weeks of isolation, Lily managed to slip a note to me through a guard. Her message was simple, but powerful. Be ready. One last attempt. I steeled myself, knowing this could be my only chance. When the time came, I was prepared. With Lily's help, I escaped the room, racing through the halls to find Ethan. My heart pounded as I turned corner after corner until finally I saw him, alone, standing at the end of the hall, his small face lighting up as he saw me. "Mommy!" he cried, running into my arms. We didn't have time for words. I lifted him, carrying him as I sprinted toward the back exit, Lily leading the way. Every step felt like an eternity, but as we burst through the doors, the cool night air hit us like a wave of freedom. Lily motioned to a car hidden in the shadows, the engine running. "Go! Get as far away from here as you can." Tears filled my eyes as I looked back at her. "Thank you, Lily. I'll never forget this." She smiled, her face fierce. "Take care of him, Sarah, and don't ever come back." With one last glance at the mansion, I climbed into the car with Ethan and we sped off into the night, leaving behind the shadows of our imprisonment. Months passed, as we rebuilt our lives, free from the grasp of Mr. Cross. We moved to a small town, blending in as much as we could, and slowly I watched as Ethan's spirit blossomed. The dark memories faded, replaced by laughter, light, and a freedom we had fought so hard to earn. And though the scars of our ordeal remained, I knew we had finally found peace. We were free. And I would spend the rest of my life ensuring that no one would ever take that freedom from us again. If you followed Sarah's journey to freedom, thank you for being part of her story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories of resilience and hope.